Today we have the Texas killing fields. As the name implies, people died there. At least 30, but possibly more. This stretch of land that covers 25 acres is located just outside of Texas City. It is vast, barren, vacant, and apparently the perfect place to hide a body. Since the 1930s, many young women have gone missing in the area surrounding the fields, and while some remain missing to this day, many of the women's bodies have been found, discarded, in said fields. And the first discovery was made in 1984. A dog carried something its owner originally thought was a ball out of the field, but it turned out to be a human skull. And after that, the floodgates opened. Clyde Edwin Hendrick, John Robert King, Peter Zwarst, Kevin Edinson Smith, and William Lewis Reese were all arrested and imprisoned for separate killings, except for King and Zwarst, who had worked together, meaning that only a total of 4 killings have been solved to date. The killers of the remaining victims, as well as the remaining victims' identities, remain unsolved to this day. Next up, we've got Alton Bridge, also known as Goatman Bridge, located between the Texas cities of Denton and Copper Canyon. The bridge was used from the 1930s all the way up to 2001 when it was closed for vehicle traffic. So yes, it's abandoned, but how has it earned itself a spot on our list today? Well, it's got a pretty dark past, which I will tell you about now. The legend goes that in August of 1938, a successful goat breeder who went by the name of Goatman, but whose real name was Oscar Washburn, hung a sign up on the bridge that read, "This way to the Goatman," which apparently severely pissed off a local radical hate group that I can't say the name of here on YouTube, but they wore white pointed hoods and they were terrible. Probably know who I'm talking about. Well, one of the members of that group took Washburn by force. They brought him to the Alton Bridge and ended his life. They threw him over the side of the bridge, but when they looked down to catch a glimpse of his body, he was nowhere to be found. Enraged, the group made their way to his home and killed his entire family. Since this alleged incident, many people have claimed on many separate occasions to have seen the ghost of Oscar Washburn leading his flock across the bridge in the middle of the night. Next up, we have the Baker Hotel in Mineral Wells, Texas, which is probably one of the most famously abandoned places in the state, according to the internet. Although it's no longer abandoned today, actually it's now a health spa. It was abandoned between the years of 1972 and 2019. The hotel opened its doors in 1929, welcoming people from all over who were attracted to this so-called crazy water with healing powers found in the town of Mineral Wells. Many spirits are said to haunt the hotel, including T.D. Baker, who died in his room of unknown causes after his mistress flung herself from a 7th floor window. Another apparition who calls the hotel home is a bellhop who was cut in half during an elevator accident back in the 1950s. If you already have a fear of elevators, I'm so sorry, that's super gross. Another is a young man who died of leukemia while staying at the hotel. Reports of red lipstick smears appearing out of nowhere, broken glass, windows opening and shutting on their own, along with legitimate ghost sightings, continue to fascinate visitors of the area and the hotel, both in its abandoned and reopened state. Next up, we have Stewart Mansion, located in Galveston Island, Texas. This area has a rough history. Before the grounds became the resting place of the Stewart Mansion, they had been the campsite of the Karankawa tribe, who were perhaps most well known for eating human flesh. The tribe was also killed on the land by John Lafitte's pirate colony in a gruesome battle. And if that's not bad enough, legend says that the father of the Stewart family went mad and killed his wife and sons, and then allegedly buried them all inside the walls of the mansion before taking his own life shortly thereafter. Many people who visit the now abandoned attraction claim to see the ghosts of the Karankawa peoples along with the ghosts of deceased pirates, as well as a voodoo priestess who many believe was a prisoner of the pirate colony, and of course the ghosts of the Stewarts, who are said to walk the halls regretfully and mournfully. Next up, at our halfway point today, we have the USS Lexington, an Essex-class aircraft carrier, say that 5 times fast, which during the Second World War participated in almost every major operation in the Pacific Theater, which was kind of the Asia-Pacific Wars, and it spent a total of 21 months in combat. As you can imagine, the massive 872-foot vessel has seen a lot of action in its day. But on its final day at sea, the vessel was hit by 2 torpedoes in its hull and it began to sink. 216 crewmen were killed and 2,735 were evacuated. In true naval fashion, the captain, Felix Stump, was the last to disembark the vessel. He did survive but died of cancer many years later. Thanks to fundraising efforts, the abandoned ship was eventually retrieved from the ocean floor and converted into a museum, which has been referred to as the most haunted in America. It's said that anyone who enters the ship will feel the presence of those who died on board. Next on our list, we have the Old Yorktown Memorial Hospital, which opened in 1951 and was abandoned in 1990, but eventually reopened many years later as a tourist attraction, meaning you can visit it if you want. While this is the case, many people believe that the hospital was never truly vacant, as even after its closure, it was home to the many ghosts that continue to roam its halls. In fact, the attraction is so haunted, it actually appeared numerous times on the reality television show Ghost Adventures. If you guys watch that, I don't know, let me know in the comments. I've never seen it. Perhaps the most famous story that outlines the horrors of the hospital would have to be the one detailing the incompetence of Dr. Leon Norwierski, who slit a patient's throat while performing a procedure on their neck. Whether or not this was an accident is highly debated. Was he incompetent or was he malicious? I don't know. I always like to think incompetence, but the ghost of the deceased patient is said to vengefully roam the halls of the former hospital. And the hospital is also home to a gaggle of ghost nuns who are super strict, and they punish those wearing unacceptable hospital clothing and sporting tattoos by pushing, scratching, or forcing them out of the building. Next up, we have Presidio Nuestra Señora de Loretta de Bahia, a fort whose name I will not be attempting to pronounce again, that was constructed in Texas by the Spanish Army in 1747. And it's the site of the Goliad event, which took place during the Texas Revolution and resulted in the deaths of somewhere between 425 to 445 people. Those who died were Texian army soldiers, prisoners of war to the Mexican army. The hundreds of men were killed with projectiles piled up and set on fire. It's a pretty dark past, so it probably comes as no surprise that the area is obviously super haunted, but what might shock you is the fact that it isn't said to be haunted by any of the men, but rather a woman who lost her lover during the gruesome event. She wanders the grounds of the fort, helplessly searching the graves for a name that can't be found. Many who visit the grounds have also reported hearing cannon fire, banging on the walls, and the strong smell of BLOOD near the fort chapel's courtyard. I'm sorry you guys, I can't say these words on here. Next up, we have a name I can definitely pronounce, Donkey Lady Bridge. We had Goatman and now we've got Donkey Lady. It's located 30 miles southwest of San Antonio, and the bridge is said to be the final resting place of a woman who was raised by donkeys after being abandoned by her parents. In 2006, the San Antonio Express released an article recounting her story. It appears as though while out one day, one of the woman's donkeys bit a man's son. The father was furious and later ambushed the woman and her donkey on the bridge, causing her to fall in the river and drowned. Many people have said that if you drive to the bridge today, turn off your car engine, you'll hear the cries of the woman and her donkey. If you have tried it, if you do try it, let me know. Starting off our top 2, we have the Toya Ghost Town. At its peak in 1910, the town was home to a whopping 1,052 people. Not that much. But today, the number has dwindled down to just 57. This is possibly due to the 2004 tornado that devastated the town, leaving the majority of the homes and the volunteer fire department abandoned. While this might sound pretty basic, those who live in the town today tell of something pretty extraordinary. Dark, but extraordinary. Locals believe that the town is occupied by entities, young people with pitch black eyes that go around the town at night, terrorizing its residents, knocking on doors and staring through windows, instilling fear into whoever might meet their gaze. It has been said that this is the true reason for the town's near total abandonment back in the early 2000s, but of course, I want to know what you think. And finally, to finish off our list today, we have the former Williamson County Jail circa 1888. The jail was home to some of Texas's most notorious criminals, including Henry Lee Lucas, who claims to have taken the lives life of 35 people in the year 1982. It's a busy guy if he did it in just 1 year. The crime rate at the time was out of control, so much so that the jail became quickly overcrowded. So overcrowded, in fact, that it became incredibly easy for inmates to slip out of the prison undetected, only to continue their reign of terror on the Williamson County people. Luckily for the locals, the majority of escaped convicts were recaptured. Unlucky for the convicts, as the majority of them were sentenced to death by lethal injection, electric chair, and the old rope and tree. But you guys know by now, I can't say that word on here. The jail was abandoned in 1971, but it later reopened as county offices, and it has been told that the deceased inmates now haunt the building, throwing binders and books from shelves and lunches off of desks. It seems like they're still kind of holding a bit of a grudge against the members of state. If you're feeling a bit disappointed at the fact that no, it's technically no longer abandoned, it once was though, so that's why it's on this list, I will give you some solace in knowing that the building is actually open for public tours during the fall season, so do with that what you will.
Elmendorf, Texas was the home of Joe Ball, who committed a series of gruesome crimes in the 30s. So this is an absolutely insane case here. I'm sure viewers from Texas are very familiar with Joe Ball, but I'd never heard of this story, and I'm pretty surprised that it's not more well known. So Joe Ball was a serial killer. He has a couple interesting nicknames: the Butcher of Elmendorf and the Alligator Man, both of which fit. He fought in World War I, and when he returned to Texas, he started making money as a bootlegger. Then, when Prohibition ended, he opened a saloon. At the back, he built a pond where he kept 6 alligators. He'd often feed live cats and dogs to the gators, but that didn't satisfy him for long. Soon, women in the area started going missing, including his own wife. Now, in 1938, 2 county sheriffs arrived at his property to question him about several of these missing women, and Ball pulled out a pistol and took his own life. But a handyman of Joe's, Clifford Wheeler, told authorities about how he'd assisted Ball in disposing of the bodies of 2 women who he'd killed, feeding them to his alligators. It's believed Joe Ball may have taken the lives of at least 20 women.
Next up, we have a small town in Texas that was once home to a lesser known but incredibly gruesome serial killer, Henry Lee Lucas, who claims to have killed over 3,000 individuals during his criminal career, which spanned from the 1960s all the way into the 1980s. Also known as the Confession Killer or Highway Stalker, Lee Lucas was born in Blacksford, Virginia, and at a young age lost his father to hypothermia, and so his mother was forced to raise him on her own. Clearly, Henry wasn't happy with this, as his mother was the first person he killed in 1960 in Michigan. He was sent to prison but only served 10 years due to overcrowding. And that's when he moved to Ringgold, Texas with his niece Frida Powell to work for a sick woman named Katie Rich, both of whom he would later kill. While he claimed to have ended the lives of thousands of individuals through restricting airways, impaling them with sharp objects, blunt force, and hit and runs, he was convicted of only 11 killings.
Texarkana is home to one of the creepiest cases in the state's history, the Texarkana Moonlight Killer case. So this case was heavy inspiration for slasher movies that would come years later, along with tons of urban legends. The killer literally wore a sack with holes cut out for his eyes and would attack innocent couples while their cars were parked in an area called Lover's Lane. It's about as classic as it gets. So the first attack happened on February 22nd, 1946. A young couple, Jimmy Hollisand and his girlfriend Mary Jean Larry, were attacked by a man with a pillowcase over his head carrying a firearm. Jimmy was pistol whipped and very injured, and Mary was attacked, but the two lived. Many of the other victims wouldn't be so lucky though. He would attack 6 other people, and it all happened in a period of 10 weeks. The assailant became known as the Phantom of Texarkana, and the case was never solved. Now we move on to Kerrville, Texas, with the case of Janine Jones, a nurse who also terrorized San Antonio. What an absolute creep this woman is. Yes, she is still alive. She took the lives of an estimated 60 young patients in her care between 1970 and 1982. She'd inject patients with a variety of substances that would cause cardiac arrest. She first started working as a licensed vocational nurse at Bexar County Hospital in San Antonio in the Pediatric Intensive Care Unit. but hospital staff started realizing that an abnormal amount of young patients were dying in Jones's care. Now, here's where things get really infuriating. An investigation could have been carried out right there and then, and things could have ended here, but the hospital didn't want any negative attention, and they certainly did not want to be sued. So instead of alerting authorities, they asked all of their current LVNs to resign and then rehired exclusively registered nurses to take control of the pediatric ICU. This meant that Jones could just move on and start working at another hospital, which she did. So more young patients died at her hands at a pediatrician's clinic in Kerrville. There, a doctor finally found she'd been accessing lethal amounts of succinylmethonium chloride. So in 1985, she was finally convicted and is now serving life in prison.
Circling right on back to Yorktown, it appears as though this particular town is home to not only an incredibly haunted hospital, but also an incredibly disturbing creature known as a Wendigo. Although the creature is best described in Algonquin folklore, which is Canadian for my Americans on this channel, many locals of the town claim to have seen one of the beasts. Many people have compared the Wendigo to a skinwalker, as it is tall and lanky and somewhat humanoid, but can shapeshift and has been known to devour human flesh. And when a Wendigo finds the body of a deceased hiker, it will often inhabit it, and then turn to killing those who attempt to come into contact with its human exterior. Many people also claim to have seen the demon take the form of animals and follow and stalk them throughout the area. Stay safe out there in Wendigo. Next up, surprise, surprise, it's another creepy hospital. Worley Hospital in Pampa, Texas. The institution was opened in 1928 but closed its doors in the 1970s due to lack of revenue. After 40 years of sitting abandoned, the building has become quite a talking point for the town's locals, who claim that it is haunted by patients who died within its walls during its 42 years of operation. After many townspeople reported seeing a black silhouette in the window of the abandoned building, ghost hunters began to take interest. Those who have entered have been greeted with decrepit and decaying walls, ceilings, and floors that have been heavily vandalized. But it appears as though trespassers aren't the only ones to make their way through the empty halls of the once surgically specialized facility. Many of the patients who died within the building's walls, as well as a 25-year-old nurse who was poisoned while working at the hospital, are said to roam the grounds. People have reported seeing demonic creatures stalking them while exploring the floors of the hospitals, with the majority of the activity taking place on the third floor, where surgeries would have been performed when the hospital was running. Oh, and the current owner of the grounds wants to renovate the building into a ministry. Coincidence? I do not think so. And finally, we have a man with a thing for eyes. Stealing them, that is. It all started in the 1990s in a rural area of Dallas. Is it a town? Not really, but this case is pure evil, so listen up. During the 90s, sex workers began turning up dead at an alarming rate, with one very striking thing in common. You guessed it, their eyes had been completely removed from their sockets. The killer was Charles Albright, also known as the eyeball killer. When he was young, Charles had quite the knack for taxidermy. He would stuff many animals a week, doing his best to make them look pristine, but there was one thing missing: eyes. His mother refused to buy glass eyes for the animals, and so instead Charles would use buttons. When he got a little older, he slept with an sex worker, which led to him getting a transmitted infection. I feel like the pieces are starting to come together. His obsession with the eyes and his hatred for women of this certain profession grew exponentially over the years, and on December 13th of 1990, he took his first life. After violating the woman, he fired a projectile from a handheld weapon, execution style, into the back of her head and carefully removed the eyes of the victim with what has been described as surgical precision. Charles was convicted of 1 killing, but most likely committed at least 3. He was sentenced to death and was executed in August of 2022.
Starting us off at number 10, the Elder Street Artist Lofts. Formerly a hospital, it's no surprise to anyone that these lofts are believed to be one of the most haunted locations in Houston, Texas. But it's not for the reason you may think. While of course many died in the hospital during its operation, as is totally normal, the paranormal experiences have to do with the fact that the hospital was built over a cemetery where roughly 3,000 Civil War and yellow fever victims were buried, along with countless graves. And isn't that just a recipe for disaster? At the time of construction, there was a ton of controversy as people were understandably concerned about building on top of a cemetery. So to ease the town, they built the basement above ground and left the graves undisturbed. Apparently, many graves were actually relocated as well, but there was no formal sweep for remains, so who knows what was left behind. As many in the town predicted, their efforts to build on top of dead bodies did not evade the inevitable spirits from rising into the building, and over the years many have reported sightings of strange shadowy figures and feelings of being watched, only to see that no one is there. Now, many actually live in these apartments today, but let me tell you, I don't care how nice these lofts are, you couldn't pay me to live in a building where ghosts were known to roam around the halls. Next up at number 9, Al Engineering Building. Back in 1959, a man named Roy Sims, who was an instructor at the university, made a grave mistake that changed his life forever. Back then, it was known as the Animal Industries Building and was home to the meat locker where students would learn how to properly butcher animals. Now, this particular day, Roy went down into the basement where the meat locker was to get some work done alone. Once down there, he started carving up a pig for some bacon when suddenly the knife in his hand slipped and punctured his thigh right in his femoral artery. Alone and bleeding out, some say he dragged himself across the floor towards the elevator before he died, leaving a long trail of blood behind him. It's believed that he haunts the building to this day, with reports of people hearing strange noises and screams coming from the basement. Some have even seen apparitions or strange objects moving along the wall, and sometimes even finding unexplained dark stains on the floor of the building. Believe it or not, some janitors have even requested to be reassigned to different areas of the building out of fear for the terrifying things they've witnessed. So enter if you dare, as the basement continues to haunt all that dare to try. Next up at number 8, the Miller Moore Mansion. Once home to wealthy plantation owners in 1861, this Dallas mansion saw more death in its lifetime than you can imagine. The mansion was owned by one William Brown Miller, and while living there he married, divorced, and then remarried another 3 times. Sadly, 2 of Miller's wives died tragically. His second wife, Minerva, died of an unknown illness, and Emma died while in childbirth. It seems that these souls, among many others, never left the mansion and can be found terrifying all who dare to visit. Guests and staff have reported feelings of being watched in the master bedroom and strange sudden drops in temperature even in the hot summer months. Visitors say they can hear babies' screams coming from the nursery and the sound of a crib being dragged into the master bedroom. But like magic, once the crib reaches the master, suddenly the baby's cries stop immediately. And if that wasn't enough to spook you, there have been countless reports of crows flying into the glass of windows only to find ghostly appearance of a face appear. Could it be the ghost of Emma trying to care for her baby they hear? You certainly won't see me sticking around long enough to find out. Next up at number 7, the White Sanitarium. Located in Wichita Falls, the White Sanitarium, also commonly known as the Old Insane Asylum, opened in 1926 under the direction of Frank White, but became abandoned sometime in the 1950s. Now, I don't know about you, but the idea of a haunted abandoned asylum just sounds like the start of a horror movie. I mean, it's not like the people that were sent off to live in asylums have great quality of life, and if they died there, I'm sure they had a vengeance. It is rumored that very strange experiments were conducted in the asylum, which many believe to be the root cause of the hauntings, as they believe these procedures killed many of the patients. Visitors and passers-by have reported hearing children screaming from the building, mysterious lights turning on when there was no electricity connected to the building, and a strange woman in white roaming the grounds and peering through windows, watching all that dare to walk walk past. Coming in at number 5, the Emily Morgan Hotel. Built in 1924 in San Antonio, Texas, the building was originally designed to be a medical arts building. Complete with a crematorium and morgue, it was known to house hundreds of doctors and was considered one of the best hospitals one could visit. That was until it closed in 1976 and became an office building, and then just 10 years later, a hotel. Today, those who work at the hotel tell frequent stories of the terrifying encounters they've had, specifically in the basement. What is now the basement of the hotel was the crematorium and morgue in its days as a hospital, and it seems whoever was left in that morgue all those years ago is not yet finished with that building or anyone who dares enter. Employees claim to have seen orbs, heard screams, and been greeted by the smell of burning flesh. But it's not just the basement that will leave you running for the hills. Apparently, the 7th floor is known to have its fair share of scary spectacles. Allegedly haunted by the ghost of a bride, no one knows what her connection is to the building, but many have come into contact with her. Guests have been known to check out in the middle of the night after hearing blood-curdling screams and seeing her reflection in the mirror. And most frightening of all is that some say they've actually seen her walk through walls. So save yourself the sleepless nights and trauma and just book a different hotel if you ever plan to visit San Antonio. Coming in at number 4, the Magnolia Hotel. Back in 1840, a Texas Ranger named James Campbell built a log cabin that later expanded into a hotel. Now this little hotel turned out to be a fairly successful little business right up until the early 1900s, but that is where the story gets dark. Most are not surprised by the haunting of the building, as not long after the log cabin was built, Campbell, the ranger who built it, was killed, leaving the property completely abandoned. With no one to oversee the property, who knows what shady people made their way in, or worse, who didn't make it out. When it was purchased in 2013 by a couple looking to bring the building back to life, it did not take them long to figure out that this place was horrifyingly haunted. The couple said they began experiencing supernatural events as soon as repairs commenced, and claimed to have heard doors slamming out of nowhere, witnessing shadowy outlines hovering in doorways, and even have photos showing strange figures climbing out of mirrors. Ugh. Since its doors opened to the public, visitors from all around the world have experienced the same strange paranormal occurrences, and there have been hundreds of accounts from people saying they saw furniture move on its own and hearing strange voices when no one was around. To date, Magnolia Hotel is known to be haunted by at least 13 different spirits, but those are just the ones they've found. The real number is assumed to be much higher. Next up at number 3, Littlefield House. Although the outside may look like a beautiful fairy castle, don't let that fool you. Located in Austin, the Littlefield House is a terrifying mansion said to be haunted by Alice Littlefield, the former mistress of the house. As legend goes, Alice and George Littlefield were a beloved couple throughout all of Austin. They couldn't have their own children, but cared deeply for their nieces and nephews and paid for all 29 of them to go to university. But not all was so perfect behind closed doors. When George would leave the house to run errands, he would lock Alice in the attic, fearing she would be kidnapped in his absence and wanting to keep her safe. Well, naturally, as being locked in an attic does to a person, she began to become hysterical, and her fear of being kidnapped and killed that was instilled by her husband slowly started to drive her mad. George then died before Alice, and it seems she slipped further into hysteria until her own death. Now Alice is known to haunt the mansion, where inexplicable sounds and shrieks can be heard echoing through the house, along with stomping feet darting up and down the stairs. If you listen closely, you just might hear her playing the piano, waiting for her husband to return. Coming in at number 2, the DeSoto Hotel. Located in El Paso, the DeSoto Hotel has been the subject for many paranormal investigations through the years. The hotel has been around for over 100 years, and if you ask the locals, they prefer not to speak of it as many get the creeps just by thinking about it. There are 3 spirits that are known to haunt the halls of the DeSoto Hotel, and investigators have captured some truly creepy evidence over the years. One of the spirits, known as the shadow in the doorway, has been captured on video lurking in the hotel's abandoned hallways, while another spirit, who's been named Sarah, is known to creepily laugh and giggle as you walk through the building. But the one you really need to be afraid of is the spirit that lives in the basement. It seems like nothing good ever happens in old creepy basements, and the DeSoto Hotel is no different. Rumored to have been used for satanic rituals in its early days as a hotel, whatever is down there does not want you to visit. While some believe the entity to be a restless spirit incapable of controlling their anger, some are convinced it's a demon. Employees and investigators have reported being pinched, growled at, scratched, hit, and even bitten by whatever is down there, and investigators have even captured what sounds like a demon answering questions on an EVP. Let's just hope that whatever is down there stays in the basement and doesn't start wandering through the rest of the building. Who knows what dangers could happen then. And coming in at number 1, the Old Park Hotel. Built back in 1886 as a lodging for cowboys in the Ballinger area, the Old Park Hotel has had a wide variety of purposes over the years, including a schoolhouse, a courthouse, and most famously, a brothel. Now a B&B and antique store you can go and see for yourself, but visitors beware, as the previous owner has reportedly identified 30 different entities present in the hotel, and it's no doubt that you'll start to experience strange paranormal sensations as soon as you enter. Patrons have reported having entire conversations with women in costume who they believe to be staff, only for them to disappear suddenly without a trace. But the worst and most scary is the spirit of the cowboy. Known to be a very angry spirit, the cowboy has been witnessed by countless guests as well as caught on camera standing menacingly in the doorway holding what appears to be a pistol. But that's not all. One paranormal investigator looking for more information on the cowboy came by and left a piece of equipment in the room to monitor the spirit. He left to go downstairs to monitor, but when he heard a large crash from upstairs, he rushed back up, only to find it completely smashed and destroyed all over the floor. Not only that, but there have been many accounts of people feeling touched or tugged or even being pushed down the stairs when no one was around them. In fact, some investigators have been so traumatized that they've checked out in the middle of the night, never to return again. Now, if a spirit can scare an investigator, then that's all the convincing I need to stay as far away as possible.
Number 10. White Rock Lake. White Rock Lake is an area that is filled with many legends. It's home to the ghost of the Lady of the Lake. Years ago, a young couple was driving home from a party along the lake late one night. The two were tired and ready to go home when the wife suddenly screamed at her husband to stop the car. A young woman in a long white gown had appeared in the road before them. The couple asked the woman if she needed a ride, and she accepted. They drove on, and all while the wife could hear the steady drip, drip, drip of water. But once they reached the address the woman had given them, they turned around to find her gone, leaving behind only a puddle. Confused, the couple got out at the address and knocked on the door. An elderly man answered. They told the man about the young woman they had just picked up, and he sighed and told them they were not the first couple to come knocking on his door late at night. The woman they had picked up was his daughter, who had drowned in White Rock Lake 10 years earlier. The Lady of the Lake has been spotted and even picked up many times since, and continues to haunt White Rock Lake in her white gown, looking for a way back home, and this is just sad. Number 9. Adolphus Hotel. The Adolphus Hotel was built on the former site of Dallas's original city hall in 1912, and the hotel has a reputation as one of the city's most prominent historical landmarks. In addition to being the oldest hotel in the city, it's no surprise it's also among the most haunted. One of the most famous spirits here is an apparition who appears in a 1930s era white wedding gown, the spirit of a jilted bride who was supposed to have been married in one of the hotel's hotel's glamorous ballrooms on the 19th floor, but ended up taking her own life at the hotel instead when her groom left her at the altar. Ever since that night, guests staying on the 19th floor report hearing a woman crying, footsteps running up and down the hall, and even the sound of rope creaking under the strain of a body. The bride's spirit has been spotted wandering the halls after events and parties, still wearing her white dress and veil. Again, this is just incredibly sad. Staff and guests of the hotel also report an eerie feeling of being watched or of a presence in the room with them. Now, not all ghost residents have sad backstories, as many are believed to be former guests who checked in again during the afterlife because they had such a good time in the hotel back in their days among the living. Guess it's a cool place to be in life and death. Number 8. The Coombs Creek Trail. Located in Oak Cliff, this trail offers a serene, scenic path along Coombs Creek for nature lovers to enjoy, but everything is not as it seems, as this trail has an eerie history. Years ago, a young girl named Mary would ride her bike every day along the trail, but one day Mary never returned home. It's still unknown whether Mary drowned in the creek, was struck by a passing train, or was taken, but she seems to have disappeared without a trace. Hikers still report seeing the figure of a young girl riding her bike dangerously close to the edge of the water, but when they call out to warn her, she vanishes into thin air. Others have reported seeing a small ghostly face of a young girl peeking at them from behind a tree. When they try to move closer to investigate, the face disappears. Then the face reappears further along the trail, inviting the hiker to follow her deeper and deeper into the woods. And if a ghost child is trying to get me to go deeper in the woods, I'm just gonna turn around and leave. Number 7. The Majestic Theater. The Majestic Theater is located on Elm Street in downtown Dallas. Elm Street? No, I've seen that movie before. Now, in the 1910s, it housed live vaudevillian performances before transitioning to screening films in 1922. The Majestic remained in business until the 1970s, and then its doors were reopened for live performances in 1983 after it landed on the National Register of Historic Places. Some say the theater's original owner, Carl Hopitzel, still haunts the building, making sure things run according to his liking. One former employee claims he shared an office space with Carl during his time there. He reports that one of his responsibilities each night was to ensure that the door in his office leading to the theater was locked, but each morning when he showed up for work, the door was wide open, and a strange chill would permeate from the room. When he mentioned this to his manager, he laughed and explained that this was only Carl, who liked to use the door to get into the theater and check up on things. Weird smells, stage props inexplicably moving, and a light hanging above the balcony illuminating on its own have all been attributed to Carl. His spirit is rumored to linger there to this day, making sure his theater runs smoothly and maybe catching a show or two. Number 6. Snuffers Restaurant on Greenville Avenue. Snuffers is a popular local chain that serves classic American food, or at least that's what it says when I Google it. But the location on Greenville Avenue serves up a lot more than just burgers. Customers and staff of the Dallas restaurant claim that the place is seriously haunted. Before Snuffers, there was an Easy Parlor. It seems that a man was badly injured after hours when a fight broke out at an employee party. He then stumbled into the bathroom where he drew his final breaths. Years later, once Easy Parlor became Snuffers, the managers would sit at a table by the bathrooms each night to finish up closing paperwork. As they sat in the dark, near empty restaurant, they would listen as antagonized, stumbling footsteps made their way to the bathroom, then watch as the door creaked open by itself and never shut. In 2013, the original building was demolished and reconstructed, but reports of strange happenings didn't stop. Other employees have since reported feeling cold gusts of wind rush by them and doors slamming shut all on their own. Sounds like a dinner and a show to me. Number 5. Flagpole Hill. Just adjacent to White Rock Lake is a road leading to the infamous Flagpole Hill, the rumored location of a band of rock-hurdling poltergeists. Yep, you heard that right, they just throw rocks at you. Passerbys report driving through the area late at night only to be pelted by a rain of pebbles. When they got out of the car to chase down the culprits, there were none to be found. Local legend identifies the ghost as 3 restless spirits tangled in the dark history of the area. According to the story, a construction worker ended their own life in the house on Flagpole Hill before its completion, and a hired hitman was later convicted of taking out the couple who occupied it. Now, don't think just because you're not in a car, you're safe. Those walking on foot rather rather than driving past seem to be just as unlucky. Hikers and other residents of the area have reported an unseen assailant pelting them with rocks as they pass by. Sounds like this place really rocks. Get it? Because so funny. Number 4. The Miller Moore Mansion. Located in Dallas Heritage Village is Miller Moore Mansion. It was completed in 1857 and was the home of William Brown Miller, who served in the Confederate Army. This beautiful home is said to be haunted by an unidentified lady ghost who always seems to lurk near the nursery. Now, the general belief of who the lady is the spirit of a woman named Emma. Now, Emma was the 3rd wife of William Brown Miller, and allegedly everyone who encounters Emma tells a similar story. People see a woman going up the stairs and they describe the same woman, always wearing a long brown dress. She has been seen in the front foyer, and people claim to have seen her in the middle window where the nursery is. Many Miller Moore visitors have also reported unexplained cold spots and a distinct feeling of being watched during their visit. Seems like Emma is always watching. Number 3. Sons of Herman Hall. Herman Hall's website marks itself as the oldest freestanding wood structure in Dallas, as well as the oldest bar. And for over 100 years, the hall has held concerts, parties, and dances. So no wonder the dead come back there to party. Both staff members and guests of the hall have reported strange occurrences, especially in late hours of the night. Some guests have seen paintings fly off the wall as thrown by some unseen force. Others have heard footsteps in the hallways and seen doors suddenly slam shut. Guests also claim to hear children laughing, even when no children were present, which is just creepy. Longtime staff members of Herman Hall report sensing a lingering presence and seeing flashes of light and shadow. One particular staff member recounts a time he and some other employees saw a couple dressed in Victorian-era clothing walk past them and go upstairs, but about 30 minutes later, when the couple hadn't returned, the staff went upstairs to find all the doors locked and no one inside them. I just think these ghosts want to return to their party days though. Number 2. Goatman's Bridge. Goatman's Bridge, more formally known as the Old Alton Bridge in Argyle. Dating back to the 1930s, locals have told tales of the specter of a strange half-man, half-goat creature lurking beneath the bridge. The Goatman is said to stand over 7 feet tall with big horns and glowing red eyes, which to me just sounds like the devil, but I mean, hey, Goatman is a cool name. Some believe the Goatman remains dormant for years at a time and awakes only to hunt for prey. Now, the Goatman isn't the only spirit on this bridge, as to keep him company is another spirit, that of a young mother crying out eternally for her lost child. Residents making their way over the bridge late at night have reported hearing her ghostly wails. Some say the two ghosts are connected, and that years ago the Goatman stole the young woman's baby. When she found out, she threw herself from the bridge, and her spirit has haunted it ever since. Now, I already don't like bridges because of heights and being over bodies of water, but being on a haunted bridge, no thank you. And coming in at number 1 is Miss Molly's Hotel. Located in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Miss Molly's Hotel is a little deceiving. In the lawless pioneer days of the Old West, Miss Molly's operated as a bordello, making working girls and their customers among the most common apparitions to appear here. One such customer even has a room named after him, the Cowboy Room, where he has been frequently spotted by guests and staff of the hotel. His name is Jake the Cowboy, and when Paula Goins became manager of Miss Molly's, she had no clue that it was haunted. After months, she reported that strange things started happening, and she eventually saw Jake herself. She said, "I saw him in full body. He walked into a room and shut the door behind him, and I went up and knocked on the door and opened the door and no one was there. That is when I knew that something was up, because I'm sitting there thinking, I know I'm not crazy." Another ghost there is assumed to be a former madame by the name of Josie King. Some suspect that she oversaw the house during its bordello days. Josie is seen a lot, usually at 3 a.m. at the foot of the bed, and allegedly Josie likes to watch people sleep. No thanks. Guests can also look at the hotel's collection of creepy photographs or listen to eerie audio recordings captured through the years.
While there are many reportedly haunted hotels in Texas, this one seems to top many lists for the most ghostly activity. Most of this seems to stem from the very chilling stories of room 525. In the 1880s, there was a young couple that was having their wedding at the hotel, or at least that was the plan. The groom got cold feet and left the bride at the altar. Now, heartbroken, she ran upstairs to their suite, room 525, and took her own life. And it said she still walks the halls in her long white gown. But that isn't the end of the story. because in 1991, another bride was spurned at the altar, and after going on a shopping spree with the groom's stolen credit card, she too returned to room 525 and took her own life. Since then, guests have seen her carrying a pistol and walking into the room, all without ever opening the door. So don't stay in room 525 or you may never check out. There's also an eerie painting that's said to be inhabited by the spirit of a young girl, the daughter of a senator, whose expression seems to change on its own. People who view the painting have said that they feel like they were floating off of the ground, though they remained on the floor. They also say that their equilibrium and balance was off for a few hours after looking at her. Coming in at number 8, we have the Marfa Lights in, you guessed it, the town of Marfa. While there is so much beauty in the area and plenty of non-spooky reasons to visit, the main tourist attraction to this quaint little town are floating, sourceless lights that seem to change color and even move in the night sky. Many visitors make the journey at all times of year to see the lights, and there's even a yearly festival made in their honor. Reported since 1883 by people of all ages and professions, no one knows what these floating orbs are. They appear at random, but usually in the same area of the sky, and since there's so much open space and low light pollution, it's perfect for stargazing, or seeing spooky orbs, I guess. Some say that these lights are UFOs, some say spirits, and others think that they're just headlights. All that I know is that if I see a mysterious floating orb, I'm going the other way. Number 7. Woman Hollering Creek, San Antonio. Said to be the home of La Llorona, or the Weeping Woman, this creepy creek leaves anyone who visits with a sense of dread. As the story goes, La Llorona was a woman who was distraught that her once doting, affectionate husband left her for another woman. And after confronting him and leaving the confrontation with cuts and bruises, she waded into the water, dressed in her best clothes, and drowned herself in the creek, right after doing the same to the rest of her family. Her chilling screams for her children can be heard all the way from the highway, giving her and the creek its very apt name. Many people have felt themselves being drawn towards the water by ghostly voices, and some have even been tugged towards the bank of the creek. Perhaps it's La Llorona looking for her next victim. The screams heard and feelings of being pulled into the water have mostly been reported by younger people, making this all the more terrifying given what La Llorona did. Number 6. El Paso High School. Now, when you're thinking of haunted places, a school isn't exactly the first place that comes to mind, but this one has quite a story. In 1985, the graduating class received their yearbooks, and when basking in the nostalgia of their group photo, they noticed something odd. A woman who no one could identify was in the picture with them. Now, obviously, that would be quite concerning. I know I'd be freaked out if there was someone I'd never seen before standing next to me in a picture. The blurry apparition still has not been identified to this day, but some think it's a student who fell from a window years before who never got to graduate. I say give her the diploma. She's already in the yearbook. Sticking in El Paso, in our number 5 spot is the Plaza Theater Performing Arts Center. As someone who loves the theater, I try to see as many shows as I can, but I think I'll skip visiting this theater, no matter how good the production is. Built in 1930 as a movie house, demolished for a parking lot in the late 80s, and rebuilt as a live theater space, this building has seen many changes, but some things have stayed constant throughout its history. Many workers of the building have reported seeing a man in one of the box seats, in a tuxedo, smoking a cigarette. One crew member recalls seeing him after turning on the stage lights, sitting alone in the box, as though he'd been there for hours already before the lights came on. And when she saw the smoking man, he turned to her and said, "We all have our time to die," and then threw himself headfirst over the balcony, vanishing before he could hit the ground. A former vice president of the theater also recalls seeing a ghostly girl bouncing a ball in the aisles of the theater and always staring. He also noticed that there was a rag doll that seemed to appear and disappear on its own, moving to locations that it couldn't have without someone's help. Even locked doors didn't seem to stop it from appearing in the projection booth. Number 4. Yorktown Memorial Hospital. Established in 1951, this abandoned hospital has been named one of the most haunted places in America. And since over 2,000 patients are said to have died within its walls before it shuttered its doors in 1992, I can see why. Reports of apparitions of people in hospital gowns running through the corridors or hiding in rooms are numerous, along with moving wheelchairs, disembodied voices, and footsteps. But there are some who have even more chilling stories. While exploring the halls and rooms that have remained largely untouched since its closure, some ghost hunters have been touched, had their clothes tugged on, or even pushed to the ground while being given a ghostly warning. Some of the spirits are believed to be that of patients who had illegal medical experiments performed on them and lost their lives in the process, making for a very vengeful ghost. Number 3. The Screaming Bridge in Arlington. On the night of February 4th, 1961, 6 from the local high school were taking a drive after seeing a movie earlier in the evening. While driving down Bedford Road toward the rail crossing bridge, which had mysteriously been burned down a few years previous, only rebuilt earlier that year, they were startled by another car reversing and honking its horn wildly. This caused the driver to speed up out of fear, and not realizing that the bridge was out, the car careened over the edge and crashed into the other side of the ravine. Unfortunately, 3 of them lost their lives that night, and their screams of terror can still be heard by anyone traveling the renamed Greenbelt Road. The saddest part of this story is that the car that startled them was being driven by a man who had just barely avoided going over the edge of the broken bridge himself, and he was reversing and honking to warn them of the danger ahead. The entire area, now known as Death Crossing, is now blocked off and no traffic travels through. At number 2 on our list, we have La Carafe in Houston. This historic bar, built originally as a bakery in 1860, has been serving patrons for decades, but many come not only for the drinks, but for a paranormal experience. Bartenders and visitors alike have seen apparitions of a hulking man walking upstairs and hearing his giant footsteps pacing the floor. No one knows who this may be, but some say he died there from some nefarious means. The former manager of the bar can also be seen staring out of the top floor window, looking over his patrons and ensuring they're having a good time. And he seems a bit more friendly. However, there are some that report the sounds of a body being dragged across the floor above, but when the sound is followed, nothing's there. Makes you wonder what happened upstairs. And since it's one of the oldest buildings in the city that's been in continuous use, it's become a tourist hotspot and a historical site. Personally, I won't be stopping in for a drink anytime soon, no matter how good the cocktails are. And finally, number 1, the Alamo. While students are taught to remember the Alamo, they don't really teach about all of the spirits who can never forget. In the infamous battle, thousands of soldiers lost their lives, and many were dumped into mass graves and others left to rot out in the sun, so it makes sense that you'd have some pissed off ghosts wandering the ground. There have been countless reports of soldier apparitions walking with weapons in hand, taking their usual patrol, and even full platoons screaming and charging into battle. Even in the afterlife they couldn't get away from war, and so they continue to fight their invisible enemy. There are also accounts of a small blonde-haired boy hiding in multiple places where the gift shop now stands, so make sure to pick up your haunted keychains. While the buildings are beautiful to look at and the area is interesting to explore, the history can leave one with a haunting feeling, and with all those spirits around, I'd be careful touring here, especially at night. 10. Bragg Road, Saratoga. The Big Thicket in southeast Texas is a dense forested area that runs along the Alabama border, and there are very few roads that cut through it. One of the most infamous is Bragg Road. In 1904, the road was built as a rail line to connect the now abandoned town of Bragg to the now thriving Saratoga. While the rails have long since been torn up, some ghostly reminders of the past still remain. When you drive down this lonely 8-mile long dirt road at night, you, like thousands of others before you, are sure to see what are known as the ghost lights, basketball-sized orbs of light that float and dance through the air, even changing in color according to some. There are a few stories on what these lights actually are. The most popular story is that a tragedy occurred on a midnight train run. The conductor, sleep-deprived from a long journey through the state, needed some fresh air to wake himself up. He stuck his head out the window, and in a freak accident, he was decapitated by a tree. And now his spirit is wandering the road, searching for his lost head. The other prevailing theory is that the light is a ghostly lantern belonging to a groom whose bride left him at the altar. He went searching for her in the forest at night, but has still never found her to this day. Known for its programs in engineering, technology, and agriculture, Texas A&M is one of the most highly regarded universities in the state. But the engineering building is home to not only future engineers, but the spirit of a former worker. In 1959, Roy Sims was the foreman for the meat locker in what was then the Animal Industries building. He was showing his assistant some tips on butchering bacon, and when the assistant stepped out to get them both some coffee, the knife slipped and Sims accidentally sliced his leg, severing his femoral artery in the process. The assistant returned to see Roy bleeding out on the floor and called an ambulance, but it was too late. and he passed away. Students and faculty alike report strange happenings in the building to this day. Noises and crashes, cool breezes when all the windows and doors are shut, and even objects moving or being out of place. And many attribute this to the ghost of Roy Sims just trying to get back to work. Number 7. Lake Highlands High School, Dallas. Imagine being back in high school, and during a rehearsal for the school play, the lights suddenly go out, and when they come back on, costumes have moved, props have crashed to the floor, and you see a ghostly apparition rise back up to the rafters. This is exactly what some students and faculty have reported at the Dallas High School. Reportedly, the ghost is that of a former student, Elizabeth, who took her own life jumping from the roof of the auditorium. While many attribute the cold spots and strange noises to the wind, there is no denying that there was a student named Elizabeth who attended the school around the same time the urban legend takes place and passed away, though the cause remains unclear. Number 6 on our list, the Ritz Theater in Corpus Christi. While there are no accounts of specific deaths associated with what was once South Texas's most beautiful theater, there are certainly enough ghostly happenings to make anyone's skin crawl. Paranormal investigators have reported that while walking through the now crumbling building, you can feel cold spots, hear voices, and see orbs floating through the air, some of which they've actually been able to catch on camera. Perhaps these are spirits who never managed to move on, or maybe they're happy right where they are, enjoying a pleasant night out at the theater in the afterlife. We won't know until somebody asks. Number 5. Jefferson Hotel, Jefferson. Originally built in 1851 as a cotton warehouse, the Jefferson Hotel has had haunting stories for decades. To this day, workers who were once skeptical of spirits have been converted to believers after dishes have gone flying, phantom footsteps were heard, and the front switchboard lit up as though the rooms were talking to each other, even when the hotel was closed to guests. Many attribute this to the ghost of Elizabeth, common ghost name I guess, who took her own life in the hotel after her soon-to-be husband sent a note that he would not be coming to the wedding. This has been verified by newspapers to have happened in the 1870s, and there have been sightings of a woman in white roaming the halls of the hotel ever since. Number 4. Hendley Row, Galveston. One of the oldest still operating commercial buildings in the city, Hendley Row has seen many occupants throughout its time. Most notably, it was a watchtower during the American Civil War. Some have reported a soldier on the roof of the building at night watching out for Union Army members. There are also many spirits who appear soaked and wet from the 1900 storm that they and 12,000 others lost their lives in. However, my favorite story from this building is actually more recent. The manager of the market was gifted a photo of Dr. Wilbur, a man who had lived and died in the buildings many years before, and they decided to hang it in the market as a historical artifact. When Hurricane Ike hit the city in 2008 and left the building in 10 feet of water, damaging so much of the property, the picture remained unharmed, despite falling in the water. During their annual Day of the Dead celebration, the photo is included on the altar, along with many other objects and candles. With a 3-person rotation to ensure it's done, the candles are extinguished at night. Yet every year, the candles are mysteriously already burning the next morning. Number 3. Haunted Train Tracks, San Antonio. On a dark night in 1936, at the rail crossing on Shane Road, just outside of San Antonio, a tragedy occurred which would rock the state to its core. An after-hours event at the local elementary school had many students staying late that night, and the school bus service was diverted till later in the evening. When it was time to go, students loaded up and headed home. Unfortunately for some, this would be their last ride. The bus had been working better than ever all evening, the bus driver noted, and suddenly it stalled out on the rail tracks. The driver tried to restart the vehicle, but it was no use. Then suddenly a train appeared. Its lamp must have been out, and it was too late to move the bus, even if it was working. The driver began to carry students off the bus as fast as he could, but then the bus was hit by the train side on, and the driver was thrown from the window. 10 students survived, but many others didn't. After recovering from his injuries and leaving the hospital weeks later, the bus driver got in his car and returned to the rail crossing that night. Haunted by grief, he drove his car onto the tracks, turned it off, and hurled his keys into the night, determined to take his own life. And when he saw the train charging down the tracks, he suddenly felt the car rolling forward, all the way off the tracks and out of harm's way. When he inspected his car, he saw multiple sets of small handprints on the back, perhaps those of the students, not wishing for his life to be lost in the same way theirs had. Number 2. Hotel Galvez, Galveston. After the devastating hurricane in 1900 that left many dead and much of the town destroyed, Galveston decided to rebuild. And with that came the Hotel Galvez. Many spirits are said to be lurking the grounds, even to this day, but the most infamous of them all is Audra. In 1952, she was staying in room 501, while her fiancé was out at sea working on a cargo vessel. When news came from the company that their ship had sunk and all hands on board were lost, Audra decided to end her life in the hotel room that night. But a few days later, her betrothed returned to the hotel. Reports had been wrong and he had survived the shipwreck, and elated to see his fiancée, he threw open the doors to room 501 and saw her body. Distraught, he then took his own life, laying next to her on the bed. Number 10. White Rock Lake Park, Dallas. In 1943, the story of the ghost of White Rock was published in a Texas folklore publication, Backwoods to Border. The story goes that there was a young couple who was looking for somewhere they could be alone. They drove down a deserted road and parked on the shore of the lake. When they turned their headlights on, they saw someone walking towards them. A woman dressed in a white sheer dress who was soaking wet was coming closer and closer to their car. Concerned, they asked the woman if she was alright, and the woman then spoke and said, "I'm sorry to intrude, and I would not under any other circumstances, but I must find a way home immediately. My boat overturned, the others are safe, but I must get home." The couple agreed to take her home, and she gave them an address not too far away. As they drove off, the driver turned back to ask for some directions, but the backseat was empty and soaking wet. When they arrived at the address the woman in white gave them, a man answered the door, and when he was told what happened, he replied, "You are the third couple who's come to me with this story. 3 weeks ago, while sailing on White Rock Lake, my daughter drowned. Many sightings have been reported since." Number 9. The Moody Mansion, Galveston. Before I get to the next entry, make sure to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video so that I can keep bringing you the most amazing content. Before it was known as the Moody Mansion, it was the Willis Mansion. Built for Narcissa Willis in 1895, this 31-room mansion boasts a Romanesque architecture with ornate features like stained glass windows and hand-carved woodwork. She commissioned the house to be built against her late husband's wishes after he'd passed, spending the family inheritance in the process, something her 10 children did not appreciate. Unfortunately, she didn't get to live there long since she passed away in 1899, and it was then purchased by the Moodys. In 1900, a hurricane destroyed much of Galveston and took the lives of some 6,000 people, but strangely, the mansion stayed standing, untouched. Perhaps it was the ghost of Narcissa keeping her prized possession safe? Visitors to the house constantly report faces and spectral images showing up in photographs taken in the house, prompting paranormal investigators to come here to do research. Number 8. San Fernando Cathedral, San Antonio. The oldest church in the entire state of Texas has stood tall for nearly 300 years, and in that time it's collected many spirits, some of whom were buried within the walls of the church themselves. When searching for paranormal activity here, one of the first things researchers often see is a white horse trotting in front of the cathedral, only to disappear soon after. It's said that the horse was a gift from an Apache tribe that was refused and killed. Other ghosts that walk the grounds include that of a man dressed in black clothes from the 18th century, who follows tours and then suddenly disappears, as well as those of monks who can be seen and heard standing at the back of the pews during services. Number 7. Demon's Road, Huntsville. Formerly known as Bowden Road, this seldom traveled dirt road is creepy enough without the ghost stories. It's overgrown, has misshapen trees, and in the dark seems like something right out of a horror movie. But there is at least one notable spirit who haunts travelers who dare come through here. A boy on a tricycle with glowing eyes has been reported by many people riding down the road. He appears in the middle of the road and stares you down until you approach him, and once you do, a thick fog rises from the ground and he disappears. There's one more story about Demon's Road that I found super interesting though. Two friends heard that the road was haunted and decided to check it out for themselves, and as they drove down it in the middle of the night, the trees seemed to shift and shake, and then they arrived at their destination at the end of Demon's Road, which just so happens to be the next entry on our list. Number 6. Martha Chapel Cemetery. When the two men drove up to the cemetery, which was named after the first person who was buried there, Martha Palmer, moonlight was piercing through the clouds and lighting the headstones and epitaphs before them. They both got out to crack a few brews and explore the cemetery, but when the driver decided to pour some on one of the graves, a skeletal hand burst from the ground, grabbing at his ankle and dragging him into the dirt. His friend and passenger ran over to help, kicking at the zombie-like arm and dragging him away. After he was freed, the driver called out for them to escape, and when he got back to his car, He looked back, but didn't see his friend who supposedly just saved his life. He was actually still sitting in the passenger seat, asleep. And as he peeled out and drove back down Demon's Road, his passenger slumped over into his lap, and the driver realized that his friend had died. Allegedly, he passed away from a heart attack on the drive to the cemetery. And in 2018, a video surfaced from someone who was exploring the Google Street View of the area and saw a ghostly image appear inside the cemetery. A creepy, pale face of a boy was behind a tree in one shot and missing in the next. There was also a large black figure in the background that did not seem to be human. Spooky stuff. Number 4. The Grove, Jefferson. This house, built in 1861, has had many owners over the years, and most would agree that the place is cursed. Since its construction, most of the owners of the house have experienced some sort of tragedy. The original owner lost his cotton factory due to a freak flood, and a lynch mob committed horrible atrocities on the properties, where 4 freed slaves were brutalized and hung from trees on the property. The spirits of these men are said to be the most active spirits on the property. Later, owners saw multiple family members take their own lives on the property, and some developed rare diseases. The spirits here are quite restless, and there are reports abound of books flying off shelves, mirrors shattering, voices telling people to do horrible things to themselves, and full-on ghostly apparitions that appear and disappear at will. All of these things show that the Grove definitely belongs on this list. Number 3. The Black Swan Inn, San Antonio. There is no relation to the 2010 film here, but the strange happenings have messed up people's minds just as much as Natalie Portman's characters was. The land that the inn now stands on has major ties to indigenous peoples from some 7,000 years ago, and is also a former battle site for the war between the Texan and Mexican army in 1842. But 35 years later, a dairy farm was founded on the land by a German immigrant. The blood-soaked soil here seems to be a bad place to build, as tragedy struck many who lived on the land. The farmer's wife passed away from cancer she developed shortly after moving in, and 2 years later, he decided to join her by taking his own life. Soon after, the property was purchased by 2 families and renamed the White Gables. However, at the age of 38, one of the new owners, Jolene Street, also passed away due to cancer, and like the owners before them, her husband hung himself in the bedroom. The inn that now stands has had reports of the spirits of the former owners wandering the halls with their necks broken, pushing guests off of their beds, and generally getting up to no good. No matter which way you slice it, this property seems cursed. Number 2. The Hill House, Mineral Springs. In part 2, I talked about the haunted Baker Hotel in Mineral Springs, but it seems that the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree, because just behind the Baker Hotel lies one of the most haunted places in Texas, the Hill House. Many people stay in this house attempting to witness paranormal activity, and most of them get more than they bargained for, and don't make it through the night without leaving terrified. The owners of the house, who purchased it in 2017 knowing its haunted history, rent it out to individuals and paranormal research teams looking to witness something terrifying. And apparently about 50% of them, including the professionals, leave within the first night. This is due to a spirit or entity that resides here named Toby, who growls loudly in your ear to get out, knocks things over, slams doors, and even gets violent. Videos show all sorts of terrible things happening to people who stay here, like a woman who was taunting the spirits, trying to make something happen, being viciously pulled off of her bed, leaving her bruised. And when she returned a year later, for some reason, she was scratched by something invisible in the room so badly that blood leaked through her shirt. Whoever Toby is, it seems like he doesn't want anyone else to come into his house and will do anything to keep them out. Number 1. Old Town Spring. While the rest of the entries on this list and my other 2 videos have had some terrifying places, our number 1 spot belongs to an entire town that is haunted, and some even say cursed. Allegedly, in the 1700s, a curse was cast by members of the Akokisa tribe on the town and its people who stole their land and killed their kin. And this curse has followed the town all the way through history, continuing even today. Every building in this small town has a haunting story, and I'll share a few of them with you now, but I encourage you to look this up because there are so many more that I just can't get to today. The Whitehall House was built in 1895 and has since been converted into a funeral home, and they have a special room upstairs designated as the Ghost Room, where the spirits of the dead who haunt the building can reside. Figures are seen walking through the door, dancing on the balcony, and heard inside. One of the previous owners decided to renovate the room and experienced, quote, violent spirit activity, and it took years for the ghosts to calm back down. There are now 2 new closed clauses in the lease agreement for the building. The ghost room is not to be disturbed, and you can't break the lease due to a haunting. Many of the buildings in town can be seen with trees growing closely and even through some of the buildings, and allegedly the curse placed upon the town ensured that if anyone cut down any trees, they would experience a terrible fire. And this has happened inexplicably many times to many different buildings in the town, and some quite recent. There is also a hanging tree where a judge sentenced more than 60 people to death, which is an insane rate, even by the standards of any time. And the old ice house, which was used to store corpses waiting to be sent to the funeral home, has a heavy energy, and everything goes quiet when you get near it. And it's burned down countless times. You know, with all of these creepy things going on throughout the years, it is no wonder people think Old Town Spring is cursed, and a no-brainer that it ended up #1 on this list, and it might even be above the #1s in part 1 and 2. Let me know what you think in the comments below.